Welcome back, fight fans, to part 2 of the Hurricane story, all about the life and the times of Rubin Carter. Now, if you've heard episode 1 already, I hope you have, because it was a great detailed episode about Rubin's life leading into this episode, being able to put that context into people's minds about who this guy was, what his life was like leading up to that fateful night, and of course, what happened in his boxing career as well, and how that went down for him. So if you've not already heard episode 1, you need to be going straight back to it, listening to it before you start delving into the depths and the rabbit hole of episode number 2. This is going to be great. This is the part I'm sure all of you are really looking forward to. This is going to be all about that infamous night of Rubin Carter's life, and we're going to be going into great detail about the descriptions. We've got some great quotes for the episode that we're really looking forward to sharing, and kind of giving you the perspective of the people that were there at the time, and this is what we've really enjoyed putting together for the episode. So I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to go into it, but it's a story that's well known. It has been told many times, but I hope you guys enjoy our interpretation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what people remember Rubin Hurricane Carter for, is this one fateful night that completely changed his life. And we've gone through quite a few. He did have a few warm-ups, didn't he, on the way to this big one. So he sort of always knew what he was in for me. Not that he knew this was going to be coming, but it was just Rubin as a young kid, and then growing up the way he did, and some of the crap that he had to deal with. And he just seemed like he was eventually just finding his way, becoming a bit of a celebrity. And he was, in Patterson, everyone knew who he was, and everyone wanted to talk to him, and he always gave him time. So, and I think what we want to try and do is we want to try and set the scene from that night, from Rubin's perspective, as well as obviously John Artis, who is going to play a big part in this as well.
So we're going to go back to June the 16th, 1969, one hot summer night, and Rubin was sitting at home watching James Brown on TV with his wife and daughter when he got a phone call from his new personal advisor, Nathan Sermond. Elwood Tuck and Rubin had ended up having a falling out over the police pressure and the fact that he stayed away from home so much. He had received an offer for Rubin to actually fight Rocky Rivera in South America, and Sermon wanted to meet with him at his club Le Petit to discuss money matters. Rubin arranged to meet chief sparring partner Wild Bill Hardney at the night spot. By Rubin's accounts, he left home late and picked up the friendly neighbourhood alcoholic John Bucks Royster. It wasn't long before he picked up someone else, and Rubin said in his own words, "Somebody else called me and I pulled over to the curb and waited. A minute later, a young fellow named John Artis sprinted up to the car. 'You going up to the night spot, Hurricane?' he asked me. 'And if so, would you drop me off?' 'Okay,' I told him, 'but I have some business to take care of down here first, but if you want to wait, I'll take you up there when I go.' So John climbed in. John Artis was a 19-year-old who was a high school track star who spent his days driving a delivery truck, but was ready to head into the army. He also loved to dance and went to bars often. Not to drink, but just to dance. He would regularly be called the dancing boy. Now, by John Artis' account, he had just finished off at one bar and decided to go to the night spot. On the way, he saw Rubin and waved down his car and asked for a lift up the hill. Rubin told him to jump in.
So that's where we begin. That's where Rubin and John meet up on that night. Now, after that meeting with Nathan Sermon, Rubin drove to the night spot and dropped off John Artis. Rubin and Bucks then went off to another club, a club called Richie's Hideaway. Now, Rubin explains what happens next, and this is all in his own words from his book, The 16th Round, and this is how he said it. He said, "So it wasn't until around 2 a.m. that we wound up back at the night spot to meet Wild Bill Hardy, who was already there. He had brought 2 other people with him, Big John and Norris were their names, and while I was standing there talking with them, a woman that I knew named Kathy Maguire came over with her mother and asked if I would drive them home. Both mother and daughter, Mrs. Mapes and Mrs. Maguire, lived in the same building. At about 2:15 a.m, I drove the 2 women home. 10 minutes later, I was back inside the night spot. So running low on a bit of money, Rubin decided to go home and pick up some more cash. And he recalls, on the way out of the club to my car, I saw John Artis again. He was standing by the door with Bucks, and I invited them along for the ride. They both agreed to come, and John wanted to drive. Since this wasn't my Eldorado, but my expensive car, a 1966 white Dodge, I tossed him the keys, gave him the directions, and settled down in the back seat.
Now, John remembers spending the night on the dance floor near the band until 2:30 a.m. He remembers the time because that was when they would ring the bell for closing time. Now, by 2:45, everyone would be out, or at least making their way out the door. John bumped into Rubin, who was outside. "Hey, Rubin, can I get a ride home?" asked John. "Well, sure. Do you have a licence?" Rubin responded. "Sure," said John. "Well then, you drive," and he threw John his keys. John Bucks Royster asked Rubin if he could catch a lift too, and he said, "Why not? Get in." So John Artis drove. Bucks was sat in the passenger seat completely intoxicated, and Rubin lay down on the back seat out of sight. Now at 2:34 a.m, police received a call about a shooting at the Lafayette Bar and Grill in Paterson, New Jersey. The night spot was a 1-minute drive away from the bar, which was situated on 428 East 18th Street on the corner of Lafayette Street. There are 2 entrances, one on each street. At 2:40 a.m, Rubin, John and Bucks are pulled over a mile from the Lafayette Bar. One officer walked over to John Artis' side and the other by the passenger window, and John recalls, "That's when he looked in and said, 'Hey champ, I didn't see you in there.' So Rubin asked, 'What are you stopping us for?' The officer replied, 'We're looking for 2 black men.' So Rubin comically replied, 'Well, any 2 black men do?' He gave me back my licence and said, 'Have a nice night,' and we took off."
So that was it. They got stopped once and the police moved on. Now we're going to jump away from John Artis and Rubin Carter now, and we're going to jump to the Lafayette Bar and Grill. Now, it was in the early hours of the morning, around 2:30 a.m, as suspected anyway, around 2:31 or something crazy like that, to be precise. But on June 17, 1966, and it was a Friday, now 2 gunmen walked in the Lafayette Bar and Grill in Paterson and started shooting without no demands. First, they shot the bartender, who was James Oliver, in the back. He was the first to see both men coming through the front door. Now, it was reported that he threw an empty bottle of beer at the men before turning away and running down the whole length of the bar. A single shotgun blast from about 7 feet away tore his lower back. The 12 gauge ripped open a 2-inch by 1-inch hole, severing his spinal column and killing him instantly. And he was 51 years old. They turned on the customers. Fred Noyox, a 60-year-old machinist who was shot with the .32 caliber just behind his right ear. Now, autopsy records say that the lead slug ploughed into his brainstem and also killed him instantly. Now, interestingly, when he was slumped over the bar, there was a shot glass full, untouched, right next to him, and the cigarette was still burning between his fingers.
The next victim was a man who also sat at a bar, 42-year-old William Marines. He was also shot in the head by the man with a pistol. But he was lucky. The .32 slug hit him in the left temple and passed through his forehead near his right eye without killing him. He stumbled to the floor, and he later said he played dead. As the shooters turned to leave, they noticed a woman, Hazel Tannis, who was 56, hiding in the corner. "No," she cried, according to the trial testimony from a witness in an upstairs apartment who heard a woman scream as the man with a shotgun fired a blast into her upper right arm and shoulder. "Finish her off," the man with a shotgun told his associate. Both killers opened fire, shooting Hazel 5 times before leaving, and this all happened in just a matter of 20 seconds.
Unbelievable. When you read all these stories, and we tried to mirror all these together for this one fateful scene, and by God, that is absolutely crazy. And from what I've heard and read, the scene was a bloody affair as well. I mean, it was just horrific. It really was. But the witness upstairs in the apartment was Patty Valentine, and she heard the shots and screaming and saw what happened next through the window. And she told a local reporter outside the courtroom. So this is obviously later on, but this is the only time we can actually get anything from Patty Valentine. And she said, "I went to see what I could see out of the side window. Seeing the neon lights on, hearing the noises, hearing the, oh no, I knew something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong. So I went to the side window, and that's when I see the white car. I instantly saw the white car, and then I see these 2 men running to the white car. I was mainly looking at the tail lights and the tag, hoping to get something from the tag. And to my memory, I have no tag letter, no number, no nothing. Just that it was dark blue plate with yellow and gold letters. Patty went downstairs to find James Oliver and Fred Naox dead, but William and Hazel were both still alive.
It's crazy what happened in just a short space of 20 seconds. I mean, the amount of times I've heard the story in so many different ways and in so many different perspectives, but still, even going through it and basically putting this across to the people we're doing it for, it makes me shudder a little bit knowing that these guys just went in there for no apparent reason and blew these people away. I don't understand why this ever took place, and it's a crazy moment, a crazy night, and for whatever reason, whatever the motive was behind the killings, it was just shocking that it happened. And obviously, we've got the follow-up to what was going to happen next. Of course, this was going to take a dramatic turn as to where things were going to go, and we're going to move into the moment where Rubin Carter, although him and John Artis and obviously Bucks are in the car, they've already been pulled over once, they've been left on the way, that wasn't the end of their night. So Rubin and John then dropped off Bucks before they pulled for a second time at around 3 a.m. on East 18th and Broadway. Now, John Artis remembers the moment and what the officers actually said, and in his words he said, "Cut off the car and get out of it and go and stand by the wall." While we were standing by the wall of this Lafayette Bar and Grill, they were bringing out bodies. And I'm looking at Rubin, and Rubin is looking at me, and I'm looking like, oh my God, this doesn't look good at all. Rubin was wearing a white sports jacket, a white shirt, black tie, black vest, black pants and black shoes, and he said, "If you saw someone walking down the street in a white jacket in the middle of the night, that you won't remember that? I'm standing there in this white jacket. Supposedly 2 minutes ago I was in this place shooting up people. You're telling me they won't recognise you? Get out of here."
Got to make him right. I mean, he weren't wearing the best of clothes by all accounts. They seem to be quite relaxed. There's nothing there to indicate that, you know, if someone had have done something like that, I think you would have seen in their face that they're up to something, and they didn't really look suspicious. It was just because of their colour of their skin. That's why. So Rubin Carter and John Artis were then ordered to accompany the police to the station, and John remembers this well. He said a paddy wagon shows up and they tell us to get in. We're going to the hospital. They take us to the emergency room, and William Marin is the only survivor. Well, he's not the only survivor. Obviously, Hazel is another survivor as well. But at the time, that was all they believed, that William was the only survivor. And he was on the gurney. And the detective tells him to take a good look at these two men and tell him basically, did they shoot you? He waves his head in a negative. He says, "Take a good look again." And he has a look, and he shook his head. No. Now, the female victim, who they didn't know was still alive, was at the time was Hazel Tannis, and she actually made it through the night. But she eventually, after taking 5 shots, it's crazy, she actually died a month later, something like 30 or 35 days later. Now, Tannis's daughter, who was Barbara Burns, actually recalls her mother telling her in the hospital that night of what she said about it. She said, "I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, please don't shoot me." So this is what Hazel told Barbara at the time. So obviously Patty Valentine didn't pick up on what she said there, but you know, you're not going to hear word for word. And then Burns would later insist that her mother picked out mugshots of Carter and Artis, explaining that you don't look a man in the eyes and plead for your life and forget what he looks like. So interestingly, that Tannis's daughter Barbara believes that her mum told her that she identified Carter and Artis, but the police say Tannis actually chose photos of 2 other men. And their version was that both William and Hazel said that the shooters were the same height. Yet, obviously, John Artis, we sort of mentioned what he used to do was he was a hurdler, but he was over 6 foot, John Artis, and he towered over Rubin, who was about 5'8". Obviously, none of them seemed to matter, as they were both still taken to the police station, where they would endure 17 hours of intense interrogation.
I was living in Paterson, New Jersey at the time. I was perhaps the most celebrated person living in that city at that time. And I was driving my car on the street, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was stopped by the police at a red light, waiting for the red light to change. And the police surrounded my car and told us to follow the car to them. And we were in a caravan, 5 police cars and my little white car, sandwiched in between them. And they took us to this bar and grill, Lafayette Bar and Grill, where there were 75 to 100 people out in the street. This is when we became aware that something terrible had taken place here. And then they took us to the hospital where one of the surviving victims still survived. And they asked us, just as you saw it in the movie, and they asked us, are these the people who did this? And the man looked at us and said, no, these are not the people. And the police were saying, are you sure this is not the guy? Because I've always had a very bad relationship with the Patterson Police Department anyway, you know. So they were wanting to get me out of the way because, like, as I said, I talked, you know what I mean? I was not passive.
Wow. Again, it's quite beyond belief when you go through the detail of it. Like, first of all, they took them both to a hospital. Why didn't they take him back to the police station, first and foremost? Yeah. Why did they take him to the hospital? Was it because they wanted to get identification from them because they thought these guys were going to die? You know, did they take him to see William Marlin first because they thought he was going to die, so that's why they've done it? But then he's basically said no. You know, he shook his head and said, no, these are not the two guys. But then you get a conflicting story from Hazel Tannis, who basically said she looked these people in the eye, she knew who they were, and she was adamant, and that's what she told her daughter. So it's very conflicting at this point. Now, the lead detective, Vincent DeSimone, leads the homicide case and the first interrogation. John Artis recalls parts of the interviews. DeSimone said, "Clear the grey clouds from over your head. Tell us what you know." John replied, "I don't know anything. I don't even know why I'm here." DeSimone's response was, "Some people have been shot." But John was quick to come back. "I haven't shot anyone." Then another detective came into the interview room with some live rounds in his hand. He tells John, "I've just found these in your car." John replies, "It's not my car. It's Rubin Carter's car." He requests that John take a closer look, but he's sharp and on the ball. "I'm not touching them. I'm not putting my hands on them. If you found them in Rubin Carter's car, you go ask Rubin, because I don't know nothing about those." All the while, Rubin was being interviewed, and he remembers, after they got my statement, they checked it with John Artis' statement to check the timelines. But the truth was, me and John Artis were never together at any point that night except the last point. John was going about doing whatever he was doing, and I was going about doing what I was doing.
Again, it's interesting that he says that, because he does say that in his book, Rubin, but Rubin does pick him up. So, I mean, whether he forgets about it, I don't know, but he does pick him up and then drops, and then obviously he's driving after. So they're the only times they meet. He obviously goes to a different club. So, I mean, even then, I mean, their timelines, what the police were trying to say is that their timelines don't cooperate. But, you know, he was just giving them a lift at the end of the day. He had only met John Artis, I believe, 3 times. And he just said, I remember him dancing in some of the clubs he went to, and he used to give him sort of a hello. So we carry on, and both Rubin Carter and John Artis were asked to participate in a lie detector test, which they both agreed to. Now, Detective Maguire led both, and they answered every question without any detection. Or did they? Now, Detective DeSimone then continued his questioning and threatened John Artis with the electric chair. John Artis said that Detective DeSimone said to him, "Look, Artis, you look like a nice kid. Just say that Rubin Carter is the one that killed these people and we'll let you go." I said I can't do that because that would be a lie, and I'm not going to say that he did it. So to add more controversy, Steve Crossman, with the classy hurricane tapes that he put together for the BBC. If you haven't heard those, great listen. Now, he found 2 pieces of evidence among DeSimone's archives of documents, which he had gathered from his son years later when he was basically in the midst of trying to collect all the evidence to put his hurricane tapes together. And one piece of paper signed by DeSimone said that Rubin and John had actually passed the lie detector test, but another piece of paper that was signed by Detective Maguire actually said that they had both failed.
Oh my God. So there's corruption straight away. That just smells like corruption to me. Why is DeSimone saying that they passed the test, and why is Maguire saying that they failed? Why would they do that? If it's one lie detector test, does that mean there was more than one lie detector test taken at the time? And that's what I've started to think about this story. You know, there's a lot more than what meets the eye to this incident and these interrogations that took place. There's a lot of inconsistencies that go on, but we're going to move on the story, and surprisingly at this point, you would be surprised to know, if you didn't already, that Rubin and John were eventually freed. But for the police, the pressure to solve the murders was on. The mayor, Frank Graves, said he wanted the murder of these 3 white people by 2 black men solved. putting more than 100 police officers on the case, with DeSimone still remaining in charge. Now, after Rubin's release, he fought his last professional fight against Juan Carlos Rivera, who was 51-13-3 in Santa Fe in Argentina on August 6, 1966, losing a points decision. Rubin Carter, although not knowing it yet, had actually finished his boxing career with a record of 27 wins, 19 by way of knockout, 12 losses and 1 draw at the age of 29, making him a middleweight contender, a nearly man. And that was the end of his boxing career. But like we said, that was unbeknown to him, because what was going to come next would shock everybody to the core.
It really would. And one thing, again, I didn't realise he had a fight in between all this as well. In my head, I always envisioned that the murders took place, he was arrested, and that was it. And then he was held and then put to prison. That was, and again, so this is all new for me as well. You know, you just sort of make assumptions in your head. So it was crazy to know that he actually fought in between all this. And so 4 months after the shoot, Leeds went dead. And it wasn't until a petty criminal, a guy that we're going to speak about quite often. His name is Alfred, a.k.a. Al Bello. Now, he came forward and he would become the prosecutor's star witness. Now, Al Bello was on the lookout during a breaking and entering, a B and an E, in a business with a guy called Arthur Dexter Bradley. And that was near the Lafayette Bar and Grill. Now, Detective DeSimone spoke on recorded tapes. And these are, again, those recorded tapes that the hurricane tapes come from. And this is what he said. He said, Bello was standing on the corner when a white car came by with 2 black occupants, and one with what appeared to be a broomstick in between his legs. Don't really understand that bit, but that's what he says. He became impatient when Bradley could not gain entrance, so he started walking to the Lafayette Grill to get some cigarettes. And when Bello reached the corner of where the murders took place, bang, bang, bang. That's what he heard. Now, instead of running, he apparently walked into the bar, walked past all of those bodies, and helped himself to $60 from the cash register. Now, although Bello did speak with the police that night, he said that he could not identify the culprits, but that story would change months later.
Well, straight away, he's just an absolute piece of shit, isn't he? Because he's going in, not only is he breaking and entering into a local business, the guy then walks in to a bar after hearing shots in the bar, and then walks past a load of dead bodies, or injured bodies. Well, what the fuck's this guy on? Oh, I'll just go and take whatever's in that cash register, and I will also just go and take some cigarettes for myself as well. And then to top all that, he first of all says he can't identify the culprits, but as we go into later on, that story's going to change, and this is why Alfred Bello is a piece of shit. So maybe Bello and Bradley's memory came racing back 4 months later when the mayor, Frank Graves, actually put up a $10,000 reward to catch the perpetrators. So, of course, these pieces of shit would certainly have their memory jogged when they knew there was a $10,000 reward up for grabs there. That was actually then increased by a further $2,500 by the Union of Bartenders. Now, Rubin felt that this incentive was the root cause of their story changing, and he said, if it wasn't for the $12,500 reward money, they would have never have done it. Plus, Bradley had 5 or 6 home robbery charges against him. They were just buying themselves out of prison. Detective DeSimone believed differently, and he said Bello was very apprehensive because of the fact that he knew he had seen those responsible for the homicide and knew that they had seen him, so he was concerned for his safety.
Oh, absolute bollocks. These two are they are absolute rats, mate. Jesus. So DeSimone and now Detective Robert Mole, they actually planted a secret recording under the table when they interviewed Bello. Now, DeSimone asks, did you recognise that man? Alfred Bello replies, I thought I knew him. I thought it was Rubin Carter. The more the interview progressed, the certain he becomes. Bello then says they were there. They were not playing jacks on the corner, and he laughed. He names John Artis as the other guy holding a handgun and the other a shotgun, identifying both as the killers. DeSimone decided that those recorded interviews from a petty thief was enough evidence to charge Rubin Carter and John Artis.
He was just looking for any excuse to charge them two. Let's have it right. He was looking for anything. So he didn't get what he wanted out of the lie detector test. So instead, he tries to use this piece of shit to well, he's coerced him into basically admitting it. If you listen to the Hurricane tapes, you know, you can hear it in a bit more detail. We've took out a few quotes out of it, but even them quotes enough are there to be able to display the sort of things he was trying to do. He's trying to lead him down this path. And obviously Bello's probably thinking in one mind, well, I'll get a $12,500 reward out of this if I say what they want to hear. And that's exactly what he's done. Now, on October the 14th, 1966, Robert Mole arrested John Artis first because they were in fear that if Rubin gets picked up first, Artis would go on the run. The day before Artis' 20th birthday, he was arrested while on a break at work. And John remembers the officers bursting into the shop with their guns drawn. One took his shotgun and pushed it underneath my chin. The detective that shoved his shotgun in John's face was Robert Mole. John, you can give me a reason not to blow your head off. I suggest you don't, because I'll blow it off in a minute. John Artis then suggests that he was drove to a dark, secluded spot in Paterson where he thought he was going to be killed. Eventually, they took him to the station. Rubin said that when he was arrested, also at gunpoint, he was taken up to the mountains. Sitting in the car handcuffed, up on the mountain, on dark roads with all these cops all around with guns. The first thing you think is, they're going to kill me.
Between June of 1966 and October of 1966, we testified before a grand jury. We were testifying before them. The whole time we're there being questioned, they're constantly telling me, look, just say that Carter shot these people and we'll let you go. Yeah, because I was well known in the city. So just say that Reuben Carter's the one that shot these people and we'll let you go. You know, that kind of thing. And then clear this dark cloud gray cloud from over your head and tell us what you know. I said, well, I don't know anything. So I don't know, I don't have any gray cloud. This officer said that he was going from south to north to respond to the scene of a shooting. And a car passed him going from west to east at a high rate of speed. And instead of getting in behind that car, he continued north and circled around to the east to head this car off. Although it went right across in front of him. And then when he couldn't find them after he had gone east, in his route coming back to the city, he see us cross the street, and that's why he stopped us. Well, on the eve of my 20th birthday, I was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of atrocious assault and battery with intent to kill. And in 1967, I went on trial for my life because they were seeking a death penalty.
That's so crazy, isn't it? The pair of them were both sort of taken away. The police say it never happened. They arrested them and took them straight to the police station. But both of them had said that they were taken to these quiet spots. I mean, John Artis was sort of saying the lights. He pulled up this other car, flickered his lights, and he went and spoke to him and then came back. He was petrified. You know, this young knight, just about to turn 20 next day. I mean, he must have been he couldn't believe it. And then you got Rubin, who's like taking up in the mountains. He's like, they're going to kill me. They're going to fucking kill me. That's basically what he's saying. He honestly felt that they were just going to take him out there and then. So with Rubin and John now arrested, Detective Robert Mole, who may I add I think he's a racist piece of shit, that's just my honest opinion, said that another informant had come forward and it was one of Rubin's brothers. Apparently, I had one of Rubin's brothers come into the headquarters and say that they knew his brother did it. He also believes that all of Paterson knew that Rubin did it and that it wasn't no secret. And Rubin counterclaims that his family never thought he did it, but that he was capable of doing it. Apparently, that's what they said. And I suppose I can understand why they would say that. Now, Rubin and John actually spent 6 months in the Passaic County Jail awaiting trial. Then on April 7, 1967, at the Passaic County Courthouse in Paterson, the jury selection was complete. And the actual trial finally took place. It actually started on Tuesday, May 9th, 1967.
Now, Vincent Hull led the prosecution, and he had no physical evidence to link Rubin Carter or John Artis to the homicides. But what he did have was Patty Valentine's description of the car and the 2 star witnesses. Bello was also called to the stand, and he strutted into the courtroom and pointed out Rubin Carter and John Artis as the murderers, saying it was those 2 Negroes there. John said he felt the urge to stand up right there and then and say, "That's a blank lie." Bello continued to say that he got right close to them thinking they were detectives, but when he realised they were the killers, he outrun them and hid in the alleyway. Now, Bello was basically a fat piece of shit, and it would never have been able to outrun a college track athlete in John Artis, or even a professional boxer in Rubin Carter, so that's a bunch of bullshit straight away. The distance he claims to have outrun both Rubin and John was 120 metres. Interestingly, John could run the 120 metre hurdles in 13 seconds, so it was just a basic bullshit story, period.
Absolute bullshit. How the fuck is this geezer going to outrun Rubin Carter and John Artis? Now, John Artis would have just caught him in seconds, and the fact that he reckons he was that close to him, he was literally be able to identify him. And also, he doesn't, when he's in court, he ain't mentioning anything about the fact that he went in and nicked that $60 from the cashier's register. They don't mention that. Of course they don't, because that would just ruin his whole persona. I mean, the fact is he was burglary. The whole thing just stunk so bad. Now, Bello's claims were thrown into further disrepute when, in another statement, he said that he had gone, obviously, into the emergency, emptied the cash register, which is what we was just saying. And his statement was conflicting from the beginning. And Bradley, who also testified that he saw Rubin Carter at the murder scene, and so did another guy who was Kenny Kellogg, and he was another criminal associated with Bello and Bradley. I mean, this is just madness. How could these be credible witnesses? It just doesn't add up to me. Now, Kenny was actually recorded on D. Simone's tape saying that Bello had told him Rubin was the killer. He came in and he said that Rubin Carter had shot up the whole bar. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, the prosecution claimed that after Rubin and John Artis killed everyone in the bar, they went back to the night spot and picked up John Royston to throw off the police because they were looking for 2 black men and not 3. They then claimed that Royston was dropped home before they got cleaned up, changed clothes, and then got rid of their guns. The guns, or bloodstained clothes, they were never found.
Of course they weren't fucking found, because they didn't. These guys didn't do it. Let's be honest. I don't believe these guys did that. There's too many coincidences here with criminals being involved and a guy who's just looking to nail somebody to the wall in D. Simone. D. Simone was looking for that catch. He was looking to solve that murder. He was looking to be in the mayor's good books, and that is exactly what he was trying to do. And no better way to do that than to pin it down on a potential track star and a professional middleweight boxer. And then you get this guy, Kenny Kellogg, who is just another piece of shit that comes into the equation. And the fact that he turns around and says he heard it from Bello, so he didn't see him himself. He just heard from Bello that he saw him. So this is like he said, she said bullshit. But yet they're using this guy, Kenny Kellogg, as another witness. Absolute bullshit. Honestly, you can't believe like this sort of shit is allowed to happen, but it did. Now, D. Simone said this on the tapes. A short time later, a detective went down to the vehicle, opened the vehicle, and found a live .32 caliber cartridge, the same type that was later removed from the bodies of the victims and could have been the same weapon that had been fired at these individuals, along with a 12-gauge shotgun shell which was found in the locked trunk. The ammunition that was found in Rubin's car was discovered 5 days after the shootings. Why didn't they find it before then? Why didn't they actually search his car before then? The question still remains, were they planted by the police? Were they Rubin's bullets? Or were they ever there at all?
3 great questions right there. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. They're found 5 days later. When Rubin gets back into his car after that 17-hour interview, when he goes back into his car's in bits. In his book, he says it's been ripped to shreds. That beautiful car that he had, he said the whole interior was ripped to shreds. How would they not have found bullets then? If they'd have found bullets then, they wouldn't have wasted no time. They would have slung their asses in prison. That's what they would have done. So they were planted. Without question, they were planted. They were planted by this one detective. And again, in those tapes, you hear the other detective, his name escapes me. He always does, because the Mole, I should always remember that, Detective Mole. And he's saying that the guy that found this ammunition was a credible guy and he would never plant anything. The guy was a racist piece of shit. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He never actually says anything, that makes you think exactly that's what he is, but you just read it between the lines. He was. Now, Raymond Brown was the defense attorney, and he was able to call on William Marins, the only guy that actually survived long enough to testify in court. And he described a 6-foot slim build with a pencil mustache as one of the shooters. And obviously neither John Artis nor Rubin Carter fit that description. Using William Maris for the defence almost actually backfired when he said that he was in no fit state to be sure, because when he got shot, one of the bullets actually went through his eye a little bit. But Ray Brown was able to find another statement by William that had him saying that both Rubin and John were innocent. And when he put it to him, he had to agree on oath. And he said yes. So in the end, it worked. So Ray on the stand, he basically should have given the defence, he should have given the defence more weight in terms of what they were portraying. They were trying to, you got criminals here that they're using for the prosecution. And then you got a legitimate guy that was there, William Marins, and clearly he's being influenced by the police. 100%, and he tries to change his story, and he's fallen. He has to admit it. The defence also had alibis as well from the two women who we spoke about in the build-up to it, who said that they were with Rubin at the times of the shooting. They also had Joy Royston, who basically he was a testimony, but his testimony didn't hold up because when he arrived in court, he was pissed. He was a local drunk. He was actually blind drunk on the night and was no use to anyone. And Rubin said about Royston, he said he hid in the attic for all the times the cops were trying to run him out of town. They basically hounded Royston to get him out of town because they didn't want him to stand in court.
Oh, it just gets worse, doesn't it? It really, really does just get worse. Completely stinks. Now, the conviction actually happened. There were 14 members of the jury. 13 of them were white, and only one of them was black, which is clearly biased towards the black man who has this perception of being an angry black man, not just a black man, a professional middleweight boxer, a potential track star, and one of them has already talked about in the past potentially shooting cops up. Already, these white people might have had this certain racism towards a Mr. Rubin Carter. Now, during this time, 2 members would actually be excluded from the final verdict. To do this, everyone's name was written on a piece of paper, and a draw is made in front of the court to see which 2 would be withdrawn. John said that he told Ray that one of the straws was folded, a 13-to-1 chance, and of course the one black person was excluded. After only 5.5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict, and it read, "We, the jury, find the defendants, Rubin Carter and John Artis, guilty." After a pause, they gave their recommendation. A recommendation for mercy. So, life imprisonment, but not the death penalty. John Artis almost fell over with shock, and Rubin, he was used to it, and angry. The first thing he noticed was how DeSimone and Robert Mole reacted. He said they were gutted that they never got sent to death, whilst Rubin and John get sent to Trenton Prison.
Yeah, oh, God. I mean, the one good thing is, it sounds good. I mean, it's not even a good way of putting it, but the one sort of silver lining, I suppose, is the fact that they weren't put to death. And that was one thing John Artis said. He was like, what does that mean at first when he sort of said that what the recommendation was? And he was like, for mercy, so you ain't going to get murdered. He was like, okay, so how long have I got? He's like, life. It's like, oh, shit. Yeah, just awful. Obviously, poor, to be fair, I feel for both of them, obviously. They've been... It just stinks. It really does. Now, Rubin was in bad frame of mind again. That bad frame of mind that he was in Jamesburg, and the mindset in Annandale prison. He was not going to abide by the rules. He says, I'm not wearing your clothes. I'm not working your jobs. I'm not eating your food. I'm not doing anything for you. Boom. They put me on a course. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that I was mad enough. I was angry enough to know that I don't belong here. I was so full of hate, and he was so full of hate. He was actually envisioning killing people, how he would kill people and how he would do it. His mind was poisoned almost beyond repair. This was until around 1970 when a guy called Fred W. Hogan, a former policeman that worked for the Public Defender's Office, met Rubin and John in a visiting room in Trenton Prison to help with his and John Artis' case. And Rubin remembers every Saturday morning, like clockwork, he would travel more than 70 miles to visit me at railway. Sometimes he stayed more than 10 hours at a clip, interrogating me, continuously questioning certain aspects of my case, trying to break through the barrier of resistance that I had built up around me for those years he was obviously in prison. He was there so often that he actually slept in a cell. And Rubin and John actually gave him the nickname Chipmunk. John's prison number was 45473. Rubin's was 45472. So Hogan called himself 45472 and a half.
Well, that's dedication, isn't it? For the fact that he's there so much and he's trying to help you guys. And it's sad, really, that you in Rubin's words, it made him so angry, and understandably so. He didn't believe he killed anyone. He knew he didn't do anything wrong. He obviously felt like people were against him, but it wasn't a surprise to him because people were always against black people at that time, and it wasn't anything different for him, I suppose. He'd been in and out of prison a few times wrongfully, and this time again was the biggest one for the biggest crime, and yeah, he just poisoned, his mind goes. But then Fred Hogan comes in and obviously things start to change a little bit, and Fred Hogan was looking for any new evidence he could muster so he could force a retrial. Now, Rubin was sent a card while in prison, and it read, "Just wanted to see how you're getting along. Dexter and Bello said they were pressured by the police when they testified against you. Now they're saying it wasn't you. Good luck and write me. I'll help you again. This is my working address. Signed, Hector Martinez." Now, Hector was an associate of Bello and Bradley, and both men were promised certain things for their testimony, which they never got. The next move for Hogan was to find them. Bello was in prison, and Bradley wasn't. He first spoke to Bello and explained why he was there, and he attempted to persuade him to come clean. Now, this is what Bello said on record to the TV network station CBS. "I told them I see two black males, but I wasn't sure if it was them. I told them it may be or not, or it may be. But they were telling me it is them." Now, Bradley wasn't so easy to persuade. Fred Hogan went to see him at his house, where he was confrontational at first, but then he managed to calm him down and get a statement that actually mirrored Bello's. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? That we were saying how much of a piece of shit these two guys were, and that it felt like they were being coerced into saying what the police officers wanted to hear, what DeSimone and Mole wanted to hear. And this later on confirms that, really, doesn't it?
It absolutely doesn't. And the pair of them, I think after 4 years, they were promised to get off with certain crimes they'd already done. One of them, I think Belly was one who was offered the prize money that they were offering, the 12,500, which he never got. 4 years later, what Belly was inside. Bradley's living at home with his mum, and even when Fred Hogan went to see Bradley as well, apparently he pulled out a gun and told him to get the fuck off his turf kind of thing, and Hogan was like, "All right, look, don't shoot me," kind of thing. But he eventually calmed him down and managed to get that statement. So it's interesting, and then the fact they started to just talk, they couldn't stop. As soon as they started, that was it. It was just you couldn't shut them up. They were saying all along it was all a lie, and I was coerced into doing it. It's new evidence. So Fred's work did not go down well, obviously, with other police officers, and it certainly didn't go down well with DeSimone, who was basically on the verge of a promotion. In his tape recordings, he ripped into Fred Hogan. He said Fred Hogan was fired from the police department and is nothing but a liar and a conniver. Hogan was undeterred, and he partnered up with Selwyn Rabb, an American journalist, author, and former investigative reporter for the New York Times. Now, before Rabb printed Bellows and Bradley's recognitions that they didn't identify Rubin and John, he spoke with DeSimone. He went to his office and spoke to him, and this is in Rabb's words, he said he stood up and he tapped his gun. "I have a weak heart. If I go, somebody else might go along with me." And then before long, he sort of said to him, "All right, DeSimone, I'm going to leave now," kind of thing. And he basically said, "Get the fuck out of here." So DeSimone was not a happy man.
I'm not surprised, because he knew that people were starting to look into this case on the verge of him getting this promotion, and the corruptness of it is going to start to come to light. Now, in 1974, Bob Dylan wrote and sang his famous protest song in support of Rubin Hurricane Carter. What a great song. We love it. I love the Hurricane song. How did this come about? Well, it came from the man himself. And Rubin says, "I realised that our story had not been told, so I said, I'm going to tell our story. I'm going to write a book." And he wrote his book, on toilet paper with a tiny pencil. The book, of course, was called The 16th Round. Now, Rubin sent the book to Bob Dylan, which he read, and he was so inspired by it that he went to visit Rubin in prison. They spent hours together talking, and it inspired him even more, so he wrote a song called Hurricane. On December the 7th, 1975, Dylan performed the song at a concert at Trenton State Prison, where Carter was temporarily an inmate. A day later, Bob Dylan put on a benefit concert at Madison Square Garden, and everyone performed in honour of Rubin Carter. It was George Lois, the Madison Avenue advertising executive, that had organised a campaign on Carter's behalf, which led to increasing public support for a retrial or pardon. Even the great Muhammad Ali lent his support to the campaign, including publicly wishing Carter good luck on his appeal during the airing of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson on September the 7th, 1973. Interestingly, Ali and Carter didn't like each other, but they built an amicable relationship when Ali actually went to visit Rubin in Trenton Prison.
I know all of you all have heard about Rubin Hurricane Carter. And the brother's been in jail 9 years, and we're not being radical. We're not trying to force nobody to do nothing, nor is he. All he's asking for is a fair trial, another trial, and all indications show that he's innocent. I want to thank all of the white people, white governors, mayors, politicians, white lawyers, white actresses. This means a lot for us black people to see that there's still some people and people of authority who want justice and equality for our people.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. And the fact that Muhammad Ali just didn't like Rubin Carter. And Rubin, to be fair, didn't take to Muhammad Ali either. He was a bigger fan of Sonny Liston. But eventually they found themselves, ended up having a better relationship than an amicable one, to be fair, actually. They actually had quite a close relationship, as we will later find out. Now, with the retrial campaign in real force, things began to look optimistic, and Detective D. Simone was not happy, obviously, with where it was all going. So he wrote to a state politician to try and stop the momentum that was building. And in Steve Crossman's Hurricane tapes, he found a recording from D. Simone, and he said, "This is more than a story of a murder case. This is a story of how public relations people, movie stars, heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali, and the media try to sway public opinion on behalf of two convicted killers. Seldom has there been a book written that exposes the abuse of freedom of speech."
But it was the secret recording that he used to interview Bello that was his downfall. It was played during the recantation hearing. Now, defence attorneys argued that the tape revealed promises beyond what Bello had actually testified to. Prosecutors had either a Brady obligation to disclose this additional expulsory evidence or a duty to disclose the fact that their witness had lied on the stand. However, Judge Samuel Larner denied this second argument as well as the recantation, saying they lacked the ring of truth. Now, the New Jersey Supreme Court stepped in and unanimously held that the evidence of various deals made between the prosecution and witnesses Bello and Bradley should have been disclosed to the defence before or during the 1967 trial, as this could have affected the jury's evaluation of the credibility of the eyewitnesses. Justice Mark Sullivan said the defendant's right to a fair trial was substantially prejudiced. The court set aside the original convictions and granted Rubin Carter and John Artis a new trial.
Well, there you go. What they didn't do was they didn't mention the tape. They didn't mention it. They should have mentioned it to the defence. You have to legally say every part of evidence to both sides, and everyone should know about it. And they didn't share that. And because of that, that's what they're saying is, if they'd have heard this tape, then it may have had some impact it would have probably had some impact, because when you do hear it back, you can actually hear that. I don't know if it's D. Simone or if it's Mole, but one of them is clearly telling him what he wants him to hear. I mean, it's very cleverly done and very subtly done, but when you listen to it, you know what it's all about, and it's just a big old scam. So Everything seemed to be going well for Rubin and John until the New Jersey governor rejected their appeal for clemency, which would have meant instant release and no need for a retrial. It was now up to the courts to decide their fate once more, and a new trial was set for March in 1976. Because of the secret tape and the recanations from Bello and Bradley, the appeals court voted 7-0 to overturn their guilty verdicts. Now, this actually meant that they were no longer guilty of murder, but they were still accused of the crime. They could now post bail and be released, awaiting the retrial, but would there be money in that Hurricane Trust Fund? Would there be enough? There wasn't. And Rubin Carter said, and this is his own words, in desperation, I called up Muhammad Ali, and he said, how much do you think the bill's going to be? I said, Muhammad, I don't know, but it's going to be substantial. John doesn't have any money. And so Muhammad Ali said, okay, I'll be there. I'll cover the bill. So sure enough, next morning, Muhammad Ali showed up and took the bail. Ron Lipton said he stood next to Muhammad Ali in court. And when the judge said, anyone going to pay back post bail, Ali stood up and said, I will, Your Honor. And he put up $10,000. Rubin Carter and John Artis were released from custody for the first time in 9 years, and they were greeted by a large crowd.
Now, following the release from prison, Rubin went on holiday to Florida with his wife, while John Artis went back to the murder scene and began working on his case, as did the state. Ronald Marmo was the chief assistant prosecutor who worked alongside Burrell Humphreys, and they wanted both Rubin and John Artis back in prison. Working against them was the defence team of Myron Beldock and Lewis, aka Lou Steele. As we mentioned earlier, Bradley had decided to change his statement that he saw Carter at the scene of the triple murders, and so did Bello. But after Bello apparently passed a lie detector test on behalf of the prosecution team when he submitted his original 1967 statement that he saw Rubin and John Artis at the scene, and he decided to change his mind once again and support the prosecution team. This was probably down to the fact that he was given no royalties for Rubin Carter's book, as he was apparently promised by Hogan. Now, to support this claim, Bello told a local reporter, if Mr. Hogan's credibility is so great, I don't see why he shouldn't submit to a lie detector test, saying that he never offered me a deal. Mr. Hogan offered me a part of Rubin Hurricane Carter book when I was in the St. County Jail. But when he didn't get what he wanted, he switched sides once again. Although Bradley had been part of the reason for a retrial, he refused to cooperate with prosecutors and defence teams who were unable to call him as a witness.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that Bello fella. My goodness me, what an absolute joker. So the defence attorney, Myron Beldock, he believed that police removed the bullets from another murder that night and placed them in Rubin Carter's car. Beldock spoke at a press conference in 1976 saying, neither of them matched the bullets or the shells that were used at the scene. They are themselves different in kind. They're different in materials, different manufacturers, etc., etc. The only thing in common were the calibers, and that was what he said. So the prosecution team, however, managed to track down a reporter that was with the detective that found the bullets and the shells in Rubin's car. That reporter testified on behalf of the prosecution. Now, Patty Valentine also testified once again that she saw two black men run to a white car which had conventional tail lights with aluminium decoration in a butterfly shape which had out-of-state plates. This time, she changed this to a more accurate description of Rubin Carter's car. She then testified on oath that she was present when the detective found shells in Rubin's car. This was the first time that it's ever come to light. Patty never gave this evidence in the first trial, which was also very odd.
It sounds like maybe the detectives are playing a little bit of coercion once more, by the sounds of it, because why all of a sudden are these people changing the statements? That's what baffles me completely about the stories. Why are people changing it all the time? Why is her original statement further from the truth than what they're trying to say it is? It is unbelievable. Now, the prosecution were also able to retrieve further information. Rubin Carter's alibis from the first trial testified that they had actually lied about being with Rubin at the time of the murders. They said they lied originally because he was a friend. Rubin had written to his alibis while in prison. Although the letter seemed harmless, it was the last part that was negative, and it said, "What I want you to do is read the front page carefully and remember it. Have your mother do the same." The prosecution then began to build a motive for the first time, and it started at the Waltz Inn on Montgomery Street on the same night of June 16, 1966, hours before the murders. A white man shot and killed the owner of the bar, Roy Holloway. The prosecution argued that this murder gave Rubin and John Artis the motive to shoot up a white bar in a racial retaliation. They believed that Eddie Rawls, the stepson of Holloway, was at the night spot trying to gather support for the shooting because the police did nothing about it. The retrial manuscript said, "Inside the night spot there was conversation, as there was all around Patterson, about the Holloway murder, and that there was going to be some shaking going on." Now, Rubin confirms that he knew Eddie and that he saw him on the night, but he never knew it was his stepfather that had been shot and was in hospital. When this motive was put forward to the jury without any justifiable evidence, the defence objected, but Judge Leopese allowed the racial motive to remain. Now, Lou Steele was actually held in contempt for standing up and shouting, "You're turning this into a racial nightmare." He was right to be angry because the prosecution were basically saying that any black man had a motive that night, not just Rubin and John Artis.
Absolutely, he did. Yeah, it was a weird one how they could use that as a motive, and that was a huge part of that second trial. That motive was precious to them, and the prosecution went to extraordinary lengths to try and locate the murder weapons. Mr. Holloway's grave was dug up because they thought the murder weapons were actually in his casket. Of course, there was no guns found other than obviously Mr. Holloway's decomposed body. Myron Beldock and Lou Steele wanted both Rubin Carter and John Artis to testify on the stand and to look at the jury's eyes and tell them that they didn't do it. They felt that it gave a little bit more backbone to what they're putting forward, and the fact that just having both the convicted testifying to the jury. And basically, John did that. He testified. But Rubin refused. He basically sat in the dock silent. And he said that he had been talking non-stop for the last 10 years and he was fed up of having to try and prove his innocence. So with the trial in the balance, Caroline Kelly enters the picture. Now, she was the bail bondswoman in 1975 and was actually asked by Muhammad Ali to get involved in the effort to win a new trial for Rubin Carter. She claimed that 6 weeks after Rubin's release on bail, he beat her unconscious, stamped on her head and left her lying on the floor of his hotel room. Now, Rubin obviously denied these allegations and denied ever laying a finger on her, saying that he was being blackmailed and she had told him to pay $150,000 to her or she would get his bail revoked. Rubin was actually never accused of the assault, but she did go to the press, which changed people's perception of Rubin once again. Now, although Caroline Kelly's allegations would have no bearing on the second trial, it did have its repercussions that made a difference, like the Hurricane Trust Fund, which began to run empty, which impacted on the defence's team ability to put a stronger case together.
The day of the verdict was on December the 21st, 1976. The New York Times reported, "All of the jurors spoke in whispers as they announced the verdict, and tears reportedly streaked the face of one of the two black jurors." After 9 hours of deliberation and after hearing nearly 6 weeks of testimony, the jury again found Carter and Artis guilty of the murders. Judge Leopese reimposed the same sentences on both men, a double life sentence for Carter, a single life sentence for Artis. Rubin spoke of his hurt after the second conviction and he said, "When I went back to prison for the second time, I was down lower than a snake's belly. When I returned to prison, I just closed down completely. I was really at the lowest point ever." It's not surprising, really, after 24 jurors condemned Rubin to yet another double life sentence, and he became even more isolated and subdued. Now, that was until 1980, when he received a letter from a 17-year-old boy called Lesra Martin. Now, if you haven't seen the movie The Hurricane with Denzel Washington, here is a brief description of his background. Lesra enrolled in a make-work program for inner-city kids, and successfully applied for the Environmental Protection Agency. It was while working in this role that a bunch of rich white Canadians took him under his wing, and they wanted to help Lesra, so they convinced his parents to let him go back to Toronto with them as long as he would come back for the holidays. It was in Toronto that Lesra bought a book from a charity shop. It was called The 16th Round, and he was immediately captivated and asked the Canadian trio to read it to him. From the time he spent listening and reading passages from the book himself, Lesra was able to learn how to read and write. He was so inspired that he decided to write to Rubin Carter and let him know that his book is still influencing people on the outside.
Yeah, this story just gets even more remarkable, doesn't it? And Rubin actually remembers the moment he read Lesra's first letter. He's, in his own words, he said, "The guard came up and put the letter on my door. I looked at it and I went on doing what I was doing. I looked at it again. I picked it up. I looked at the handwriting. It was very bad. It looked like a child had done this. And it said, 'Dear Mr. Carter, I read your book. I want you to know that I think you're innocent.'" And that was it, right to the point, a lot like his Canadian friends. And Rubin recalls the feeling he had when he read it. I mean, just a short, very short letter, but he said it was nice. It was very, very nice. It just made him feel warm inside. And he immediately wrote back to Lesra. Now, they continued as pen pals until Lesra plucked up the courage to ask if he could meet Rubin in prison, and Rubin accepted the request. Now, the first time they met, Lesra was petrified. His brother had actually been in prison. He had never visited his brother while he was in prison. But when he arrived to see Rubin, he was shaking. And Rubin embraced him, his young fan, and soothed his worries away before they began talking at length. And as Lesra left, he immediately thought anything that can be done should be done to get this man out of here.
After the second conviction, all of his support fell away, and it was a lonely time for Rubin.
I was down lower than a snake's belly.
He was severely depressed.
I just closed down completely.
And the fact that people wouldn't pick up the phone. The only person actually who was consistently in his corner was Muhammad Ali.
How can I do this again? I can't call these people up that I called up before. They did it already. They did what they could do for me, and they can't do anything more for me.
There wasn't much people could do because this was now a twice convicted triple murderer. I remember the day of the verdict. We were down in the county jail lockup below the courthouse. And I said, everything that we had planned is over. It's done. And he said, no, everything's just gone back to the way it was, Tom. The system is the system. I didn't expect much difference.
I wanted to let him know that despite the hardships that he must have been going through in prison, I wanted him to know that he was still having an influence. He was still having an impact on somebody's life outside of the prison walls.
I can see myself now. I'm sitting in a chair. Here's my bed. Here's the cell door. And I remember I was sitting and the guard came up and put the letter on my door. Didn't say anything to me, anything. Put the letter on the door. And I looked at it. And I went on doing what I was doing. And I looked at it again. I picked it up, read it. I looked at his handwriting. It was very bad. Very bad handwriting. Look like a little child did this. And it said, "Dear Mr. Carter, I read your book. I want you to know that I think you're innocent." It was nice. It was a nice letter. But it didn't say anything. It was just nice. It was just nice. I sat down and I typed the letter.
Now, after 15 years in prison, John Artis was actually paroled in December 1981 at the first time of asking. It was common knowledge that lifers never get parole in the first hearing, so John Artis didn't expect much more than a new hearing in a year or so. Now, in a strange turn of events, John Artis was agreed to be released, and he called the feeling indescribable. But he was still a convicted killer, something he would never be able to clear unless Rubin is acquitted. While John could finally enjoy his freedom, Rubin was beginning to find hope through Lesra, who he renamed Lazarus. Now, Loose Steel remembers the change in Rubin, and he said in his words, "Lesra was the person who opened Rubin's mind to really engage in the outside world. Lesra and Rubin built a relationship of trust that was very, very helpful. Lesra's Canadian family got behind him, and they moved to New Jersey in 1982, declaring they will stay until officials released Rubin Carter. Now local, they began to work with Rubin's legal team, who at this point included Leon Friedman. Now the Canadians brought a wealth of knowledge and money to the legal team, something that the legal team was lacking in. Now Friedman remembers reading one section of the brief and he said, "I said I didn't write this. Who wrote this?" Someone said, "The Canadians." I asked, "Is it right?" They said, "If the Canadians say it's right, then it's right." Now they never found any new evidence, but they worked very hard to put all the pieces of this puzzle together.
They did, and there was so many other descriptions of the three Canadians, and they were really helpful. And obviously, you can see from the Hurricane film. So by 1985, Rubin had served 19 years and decided to request his lawyers, Leon Friedman and Lou Steele, to put in motion a process called habeas corpus. Now, this is a medieval Latin terminology meaning a recourse in law through which a person can report an unlawful detention or imprisonment to a court and request that the court order the custodian of the person, usually a prison official, to bring the prisoner to court to determine whether the detention is lawful or not. It's basically, was he put in prison for the right reasons? That's in a nutshell. Now, it was a shot in the dark, and the percentage success was limited at best. Just like John Artis being granted immediate parole, there was a turn of fate in Rubin Carter's case, and Judge Lee Sorokin was called to oversee the hearing, a judge that was known for his lenient side. Now, he remembers, or he has no memory of Rubin Carter at all, and he actually said, "Truthfully, I have no recollection of hearing his name until the suit came to me," because basically what the prosecutors were saying, they were saying that it weren't no turn of events, it weren't no fate. This guy was put in because they knew he was lenient. But what Judge Sorokin always maintained is that it's just, you're given the case. You don't actually go and pursue a case. He's actually given this case. So for him, it wasn't a coincidence. It was what it was. It was probably a bit of fate for Rubin.
Now, Rubin's now larger legal team filed for summary judgment, which meant no day in court, no witnesses, and no evidence. Each side had to submit documents to the judge, who makes a decision based on who described the better argument. The document could be no longer than 90 pages, which would have been a mammoth task to fit all the details in such a small margin. Rubin's legal team named it the Red Zinger. Now, they smartly used Helvetica font to condense the print so they could cram more words onto the pages. When Judge Sorokin received both documents, he was impressed by the standard of what Rubin's team put forward, and he said, "The written submissions were so unique and so beautifully done. So at the point I was already impressed with the lawyers. All three lawyers in that case did a remarkable job." They clearly got an A star for presentation, but what about the opposition? Judge Sorokin said, "I was so unimpressed with the presentation of the state, and in the content they glossed over things that I thought were very critical." So it's quite obvious that Judge Sorokin at this time, his lenient side, I think it's more him being a judge and actually being objective, and him not knowing about this case beforehand had a huge impact on his perception of what he was going into when he seen the two documents.
Oh, absolutely, that helped. And the fact is whatever the prosecution had against Judge Sorokin, he was clearly there to, I wouldn't say lenient, as you say, just to gather the evidence and make a decision himself. So Judge Sorokin was not ruling actually on Rubin's innocence or guilt. He was only ruling on whether or not Carter and Artis got a fair trial. So that was what he was there for. The main points of interest for Judge Sorokin were the racial revenge claims and the testimony of Bellew. Now, firstly, Judge Sorokin deemed the racial revenge motive as unconstitutional. He was not convinced that argument linked Rubin and John to the murders. Now, the second part that he highlighted was the statement of Bellew, and the one he gave on stand, and he basically did not cooperate with the lie detector test that he did for the prosecution team in the retrial. They specifically asked Bellew if he was standing outside the Lafayette Bar and Grill or if he was inside when he saw Rubin and John Artis, which he believed were both bearing shotguns and a handgun. Reason being, they couldn't afford to have him stand in court and go backwards on his original testimony if he was going to be described as a credible witness, which, I mean, I think we're pretty clear he definitely wasn't that. Now, Bello was informed that he passed the test when in actual fact he hadn't. So they actually told him he passed. So therefore, Judge Sorokin had no choice but to disbelieve Bello's side of events. And also the fact was if he knew he failed that lie detector test, then he probably wouldn't have wanted to testify anyway, because obviously he's lied and he wouldn't have been able to help the prosecution. So after months of deliberation, he announced his verdict. Judge Haddon Lee Sorokin of the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey granted the injunction and set aside the convictions of Rubin Carter and that of, obviously, John Artis. Now, he was freed at the age of 48 years old without a bail fee on November 7, 1985. And then Judge Sorokin noted in part of his notes was the verdict was based upon race rather than reason and concealment rather than disclosure.
The one thing I will say about Bello is that thank fuck they finally dismissed this absolute scumbag's shitty testimony. I cannot believe that. Like, it just goes to show you how corrupt things were, because he was told that he passed the lie detector test when he didn't. So he was told that because they knew, the police knew, so D. Simone and Robert Mole knew if he would have been told he didn't pass the test, why would he have given evidence at a testimony? They knew they couldn't get him to do the testimony otherwise, so they used it against him, and it was very clever what they did, although they would have argued otherwise at the time. So Judge Sorokin makes that decision based on the information he's presented with. And with the convictions now squashed, Friedman moved quickly and filed for a bail hearing the next day, as they were all still worried about Rubin, who at this point wasn't in a good mental state of mind. He was said to be still filled with pure hatred. Now, the court was packed to the rafters as they waited in anticipation. To try and prevent Rubin's release, the prosecution used psychiatric reports as a reason for him not to be released on bail, all of which were apparently grim reading, but Judge Sorokin requested Rubin's prison records to see if he had been violent in the last 10 years, and the answer was no. That report was enough for him to grant bail without a fee and released him to the custody of his lawyers. The only restriction was that he was unable to leave the country. When he announced his verdict, the courtroom went hysterical with joy. Judge Sorokin did not mention corruptness or that the prosecution were out to get Rubin. He said, "I don't believe that any prosecutor goes around and indicts and tries innocent people. But I do think once they think they have somebody guilty, they improve their case or stick to it, regardless of what the facts may actually be. And I think that's what happened in this case." Judge Sorokin said that Rubin called him the same night to thank him, something he would do every year on July the 7th to commemorate the date.
I was 29 years old when they arrested me. And I was 49 when they released me.
Ready to face life. With what?
With nothing. With nothing except a lot of friends and a lot of good cheer and a lot of goodness around me, a lot of sweetness around me. That's what.
Is there still a hurricane in Rubin Hurricane Carter?
There's always been a hurricane in Rubin Carter. That's Rubin Carter, the hurricane. And hurricane is beautiful.
Yeah, he ended up calling him on a regular basis all the time. He always knew what the date was, just to say thank you for obviously releasing him, which was great for Rubin. He didn't deserve to be in prison, in my opinion. We're going to start going into some of the other details now. So there's some more theories, and there are some elements from other people that reckon that there may have been corruption involved. So I think that's pretty clear that there was. So Rubin's old sparring mate and friend, Ron Lipton, became a New Jersey cop while Rubin was in prison, and then an investigator in the prosecutor's office. Now, working as a policeman, he actually overheard a conversation at a charity event between unnamed officers and prosecutors. And he said, "I heard them bragging about how they framed this black man from Patterson. The black man was Rubin Carter." He continued by saying, "I saw, I heard, I know. As far as planting evidence and lying under oath, there were things like that, and that came into question in this case, and it's very disturbing. There is another part, another side to this whole story, and a complete other story. It's an alternative theory or a report that was written by a guy called Eldridge Hawkins and his assistant, Apprentice Thompson.
So we're going to go into more details about Eldridge Hawkins and Apprentice Thompson. Eldridge Hawkins was a young black politician and former lawyer that was put on the case by Governor Byrne in 1976 when the appeal for clemency was put forward. In Hawkins' 22-page report, he gave a completely different version of events on that fateful night. Firstly, he uncovered two new witnesses, Annie Haggins and Henry Van Gelder, a cab driver that escorted Annie and two black men in his car. Annie told Eldridge that she had been to many bars that night and one of those bars was the Night Spot. She explained that she saw Rubin Carter talking to two men, the owner of the bar, Elwood Tuck, and his barman, Eddie Rawls. She also identified John Artis in the bar. She then said she accompanied Eddie Rawls and Elwood Tuck in a black car while Rubin and John Artis drove in the white Dodge to the Lafayette Bar and Grill. When they arrived, Rubin, John Artis and Annie apparently walked into the bar, only to be immediately told to leave because of their colour. This meant that the bar was obviously racist, so Eddie Rawls and Elwood Tuck walked in and shot the place up. Annie was then driven to another location by Eddie and Elwood, and then told to hold the murder weapon before calling her a cab. The cab driver was Henry Van Gelder. He remembers pulling up alongside a black car to collect Annie before she burst into tears and told him that there had been a murder in Patterson and she was forced to hold the murder weapon. Annie Haggins did a lie detector test based on all this information and she passed the test.
She did, and also they hypnotised her as well. As apparently what Hawkins did. A truth serum is another thing that he actually put to John Artis. He wanted John Artis to do hypnosis and to drink truth serum to apparently and give his version of events, which John abruptly told him no. But apparently Annie did both. That is Annie's version of events. And the other thing was, just one thing I did want to say, is that Hawkins' report, although it was 22 pages, only 19 of those pages were actually released. 3 pages were kept back, I believe, by Governor Byrne, or by, not necessarily by Governor Byrne, but by the authorities. And Hawkins, I believe, I'm not quite sure, we didn't investigate too much. I don't know if Hawkins he's doing a book with his wife, and they're going to disclose what was in those last 3 pages. I'm not quite sure whether it's out or not. As again, I didn't really look into that, but that's something maybe we could do later on down the line. So Eldridge Hawkins then managed to piece together more details that corroborated with Annie's story. He also discovered, amongst the evidence collated from the 1966 case, or the 1966 trial, that a black police sergeant named Capter testified in court that he saw a white and a black car whiz past. Now, Police Sergeant Capter was the policeman who actually stopped Rubin and John Artis twice that night. The black car was also mentioned in Alfred Bellow's second statement. Hawkins managed to question Bellow, and he did agree that he had indeed saw a black car also. I believe Bellow is also still on record today that he definitely see those 2 cars, and he see 5 people, 2 black guys in one car, 2 black guys and a woman in another car. But he did say that the woman, who was Annie Haggins, was in Rubin's car, but she says that she was in a black car. So again, it's all crazy. I mean, do you believe Bellow? Probably not. So this information was actually heard at a grand jury, which was like a secret grand jury. It's in private, to see if there was more indictments that should be upheld. And Hawkins says that this never happened because Matthew Boylan, the director of the Division of Criminal Justice for the Attorney General's office in New Jersey, he didn't request that the jury take a vote. So basically, the prosecutor has to request for a jury to take a vote to see whether they're going to put forward any more indictments. He didn't do that, so there was never a vote. And that was basically where Eldridge Hawkins' report ends.
Now, we're going to talk about Apprentice Thompson. Apprentice Thompson assisted Hawkins in his investigation, and also he wrote a report that was buried deep within the evidence. In this report in 1975, he mentioned that Eddie Rawls had failed a lie detector test the same night as Rubin and John Artis, and this does corroborate with Detective D. Simone's evidence file. Thompson also says that Rawls' former wife was ready to contradict Rawls' alibi of being at his stepfather's house at the time of the murders. She was ready to do a lie detector test, but she pulled out in fear. In fact, Thompson writes in his report that Mr. Rawls called him and said, "If you keep questioning my old ladies and going into my background, someone is going to get hurt." This report also states, "If I'm the guy that did the shooting, then why don't you go out and get the other guy that was with me?" There are two other eyewitnesses that fled Patterson not long after the murders and who have claimed that Eddie Rawls was at the scene and seen running away from the Lafayette Bar and Grill. One in particular, she said, heard shots just before this happened. That comes to the end of the whole conspiracy theory side of things now, and I think this is where the interesting conversation comes up, because there's many conspiracy theories about what happened. My interpretation of this information from Hawkins and Thompson is that there was two other people involved. Eddie Rawls appears to be one of the guys that was potentially the shooter on the night at the Lafayette Bar and Grill, and there was obviously someone else with him. I don't know how Rubin Carter and John Artis fit into this and where Annie fits into it, because there are contradicting sort of statements about what happened, whose car she was in at the time. But I think the one thing that comes out of this for me was that Rubin Carter didn't do this. He was basically the scapegoat for a murder that was racially motivated because of something that happened elsewhere, and he was just the easy target that night. And because of something he'd said in the past, as we said in episode 1, we think that this is surely got to be, for me, this is the wrong place at the wrong time. But because of who he was and what he'd said, he was the easy target. He was the guy that they were going to nail to the wall, nail his ass to the wall.
Yeah, exactly. That's what a lot of people around him said. And I mean, the funny thing is with Annie's statements, nothing ever came of it. One of the prosecutors, I think he was in the second trial, he said he had met with Annie and had a long conversation with her, and he said that he felt that she wasn't a credible witness after a while. But then you've got the taxi driver who also actually testified in this grand jury, this private grand jury call, and he testified to say that he had picked her up and there was a black car present. Obviously, that the police, the sergeant that capped her, that obviously pulled him over twice, he reckons he see a black car as well. I mean, the fact is they were in the same place at the same time. So in my opinion, I mean, the amount of time I've read his book, obviously it stops, Rubin's book stops while he's in prison and even before he meets Lesra. So the hurricane tapes have been terrific to be able to listen to, and they almost bring that book alive when you're reading it and then you're listening to Rubin speak, as well as everybody else like John Artis, etc. But I think if they were at the same place, Eddie Rawls is adamant that he's screwing. He even goes to the police station and starts yelling and saying what you're going to do about it. And apparently it was around that time, I believe, when the shootings were happening as well. That's what someone else said. So that's where he doesn't quite cooperate. But then other witnesses that are not willing to come forward have identified Eddie as running away. And the other thing was that Eddie Rawls and Elwood Tuck apparently were the same height, and one of them had a tash. So and one of Marin, one of the guys that was shot, he says he see a tash, he had a pencil thin tash on the top lip. So the chances are it was these two guys. They could have left the night spot at the same time. After having a conversation, they could have all left. So maybe Artis and Rubin were in front, but I find it difficult to believe that the Lafayette bar that they went in with Annie, I think that the two shooters, it is Eddie. I think Eddie Rawls is. I'm not 100% certain of who he was with. Elwood Tuck is actually still around. He's alive. Obviously, he's not come forward and said anything. But was it him? He potentially could have been with him. I think Eddie was trying to use Rubin and John Artis with Annie and try to put them in the frame when they weren't. They were probably just driving back to go and get the money that Rubin wanted. So I don't believe either Rubin Carter or John Artis were ever involved in it. I think they probably heard about it and they knew Eddie, and obviously he's decided to take matters into his own hands. That's what I think.
I agree with that, and I think most people that hear the story and read the book and listen to the Hurricane tapes and listen to Rubin's voice, listen to everybody that was around, all them tapes, the evidence that was unearthed by Steve Crossman at the BBC was brilliant. And we highly recommend that. After listening to this episode, please do go and listen to that. If you've not listened to it already, of course, if you have, you'll know all about all the stuff that we've added into this particular episode, the other stuff we've researched for the episode. Ultimately, what it smells of is complete corruption. That Vincent DeSimone wanted to put someone away for this murder, and Rubin Carter was the man that he wanted to put away. I think that was just because he hated the guy. I just don't think he liked him because of what Rubin Carter said and what was taken out of context with his comments years before. He just saw him as the target. He was black. He fit the description. He fit the bill. They managed to get coerced statements, lie detector tests that were fake. There was corruption. Simone was asked about that, and in the tapes, he does mention about he'd never do anything of the sort. Would he admit to something like that if he did it? Would he fuck? There's not a chance in hell. He would have took that to his grave with him. There's no way he would have admitted to something like that. For me, Rubin Carter and John Artis were the victims in this story. They were the guys that were put into prison for an extended period of time for crimes that they didn't commit. And I think it's only right that we sign off really with Rubin Carter and what happened to him after his release. And he lived in Toronto, of all places, Toronto, Ontario, where he became a Canadian citizen and was the executive director of the Association in Defence of the Wrongly Convicted, also known as the AIDWYC, from 1993 until 2005, before he resigned due to lack of support in another case that he was involved in. Now, Carter's second marriage was to Lisa Peters, but the couple then later separated. In 1996, Carter, then 59 years of age, was actually arrested when Toronto police mistakenly identified him as a suspect in his 30s, believed to have sold drugs to an undercover officer. He was actually released after the police realised that they'd made a little bit of a grave error there.
Oh, God, I bet we thought, here we go again. I just can never escape this. But Carter often served also as a motivational speaker. You can find some of his stuff on YouTube. And on October 14, 2005, he received 2 honorary Doctor of Law, one from the York University, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and one from the Griffith University in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, in recognition for his work with the AIDWYC and the Innocence Project. So Carter received the Abolition Award from the Death Penalty Focus also in 1996. And then unfortunately, Rubin was actually diagnosed with prostate cancer, and John Artis lived and cared for Carter. And then unfortunately, on April 20, 2014, Carter passed away. He was afterwards cremated, and his ashes were scattered in part over Cape Cod and in part at a horse farm in Kentucky.
I think the best way to sort of sign off this episode is really signing off with a quotation from Rubin Carter himself, and it reads, "If I find a heaven after this life, I'll be quite surprised. In my own years on this planet, though I lived in hell for the first 49 years, and I've been in heaven for the past 28 years. To live in a world where truth matters, and justice, however late, really happens, that world would be heaven enough for all of us." And that's a great quote from Rubin Carter. He was full of them. He was full of these great quotes. There were some where you felt they were obviously hatred-filled, but there were a lot of them where they were very inspirational. And he's become a man of inspiration for a lot of people around the world. People think of this story and think of various different elements of it. They think of a middleweight contender who could have been a world champion. They think of a guy who was wrongly convicted for a crime he didn't commit. They also think of a guy who was very motivational and who is looked at in this generation as an idol, someone to look towards, someone to look at in desperation or hope when it's needed. You look to a guy like Rubin Carter's story and you think of what he had to go through to be able to clear his name, and eventually he did get there in the end, and that is what that quote is all about. And if it could be like that in general, life would be so much better. It's been a great story. It's a story that, as we said at the very start of part 1, we knew about this story. We knew elements of the story. We'd both watched the film. We'd listened to the Hurricane tapes. We'd both done our own research on this. And we was ready to present this story for the darker side of boxing, because it does epitomise what the darker side of boxing is all about. A guy that was wrongly committed for something he never did. The corruption around it, although corruption was never proven in this case, there was corruption there. There was so much corruption going on, and the fact that it was framed and the police brutality, the way the police were at the time, it all forms one big part of what has been an unbelievable story and a great finale to the darker side of boxing.
Yeah, it is, and we always knew we was gonna get Rubin Carter's story in, and I know I always felt like I knew it, and I don't think I quite did. Just hearing what Rubin was like as a child and going into adulthood, and reading the 16th Round, which is a book. I remember when I watched the film, I'm going to get that book, and I just never got around to it. So it's been nice to be able to actually read that page for page and listen to him. I mean, he does rant on a bit. He did have a bit of an ego. Absolutely. After being wrongly convicted for 19 years, I sort of think that he probably has a right to be however he wants. You know, he never. The other thing was as well is the prosecution team. They were adamant that he was an aggressive person. I mean, he was. You can see from the stories and why he became an aggressive person. From what we've put to you, you can completely understand it. But he never reoffended again when he left prison, and the prosecution team constantly felt that he was a danger to society, and clearly it wasn't. I mean, one of the prosecutors actually came out with something ridiculous in those Hurricane tapes, where he was saying that when a repeat offender reaches the age of 40, they no longer do it. They no longer want to carry on with what they did in their youth, which was just a weird thing to say when they put, after he was released, that they continued to try and get a retrial. Apparently 13 times they attempted to get a retrial to get Rubin back inside and back in prison. He was over 40 by then, so why did they bother? It doesn't make no sense. It just doesn't sit right. They still today will always say, that state will always say that Rubin Carter was the killer, and so was John Artis. And I'm just pleased they were able to clear their names. And the one other bit of information that we mentioned, Dee Simone. Dee Simone was actually asked by one of the prosecutors, Mr. Hull, to look into Eddie Rolls. He actually formally asked Detective Dee Simone to look into Eddie Rolls, considering the information they had. There's probably more information on Eddie Rolls to be the murderer or the John Artis and Rubin Carter. Well, there was, and he did nothing. So, as you rightly said, Sean, he had a target on his back and he was out to get Rubin Carter, and if John Artis came along with him, that was fine. He did attempt several times to try and tell John Artis, if you tell me Rubin did it, we will let you go. Literally, he will be out of prison the next day, and he never did. And you got to give credit to a young lad of that age to not do that. So it's just, the story just evolved, and the pages come to life. As I say, as I was reading that 16th round and listening to the Hurricane tapes, doing it together, the research, it is just, it was one of the best ones I've done for the dark side of boxing. I think we've done it justice, and I hope we've told the right side of the story. The first part, all about him in a boxer and then leaving it and all the troubles he had as a youngster, and into the nitty gritty of the crime. So yeah, I think it's a great one to finish the season off with.
It's been a fantastic episode to finish the season off with. We've really, really enjoyed doing the Rubin Carter story, the Hurricane story, and we'll of course be doing a wrap-up to the season. We'll be doing a season wrap-up episode, much like we did with our Legendary Nights series, and we're going to be sitting down and talking about everything we've done over the course of the season, some of the great parts of the episodes that we've done, some of the difficult parts of getting information, putting it all together to present these stories, of course. But this was all about Rubin Carter's story, and if you've enjoyed it, please let us know on social media, on Twitter, at darker_side_pod. If you're on Facebook, you can go and like the page, the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. If you're a patron, thank you so much for supporting us. You'll be getting access to this episode earlier than everybody else, and we absolutely 100% appreciate all your support and the love that you're giving us to help us move forward to go into another season of the Darker Side of Boxing later on this year. For everybody else that's been supporting us, of course, we love you guys as well. Thank you so much for buying into this truly unique podcast. This is something that we didn't know what was going to come of it, and it's turned into something beautiful for us, magical. We really enjoyed doing this, and we know there's a lot of nitty gritty, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of swearing in this one, but this is what it's all about. It's all about bringing two of our loves together, true crime and boxing. If you've enjoyed it, please go and let us know. It's so important. Leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review on any of the podcasting apps that you're on. It really, really does help get the word of mouth out there. and we'll see you in a few weeks for the wrap-up episode for this season. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode, The Hurricane Story, Rubin Carter.